Hi there. Alright, well, it's been a little while since I did music memories. I'd already been looking into this place down in Natchitoches called the Louisiana School for Math, Science, and the Arts. And there were different things here or there, and I just kind of charted my own course, I guess I'd say. So I'm going to take these in kind of release order. It's about 50 different either songs or albums that from about 91, 92-ish until about 94 that had an impact. So first of all, one of the ones I started to get into through a friend on the basketball team at Riverfield was Carman, and I had never heard anything like that. He was quite an entertainer, did story songs, and his album Revival on the Land was pretty different. I had never heard anything like that. That was actually from 1989, but I was kind of behind the curve on getting into Christian music. In January of 1990, we had cable and MTV, and I started seeing this music video for this song called Fly to the Angels by Slaughter, and I loved it because they had portrayed old-fashioned propeller aircraft, and I really dug aircraft and such. An artist I came back to and found a song of was a Christian artist, Geoff in the Distance, had a song called Rescue Me from 1990. I didn't really find out that much about it until I went back and discovered some earlier of Geoff Moore's catalog. Another one that came out in 1990, I've already said I like Poison. They came out with the song Something to Believe In, and it always got me when mainstream artists would sing about spiritual things or sing about dealing with crisis of belief sort of things. An album that came out in 1990, and I had heard like a song off of it through watching the late night Christian music video thing, Light Music, but I didn't actually hear the album itself until I got my first roommate at the Louisiana School. He actually had the album White Heart Powerhouse. There were two tracks off of it that I just loved called Independence Day, and another one was called Desert Rose. My roommate there, Al, he also introduced me to something that I wasn't all that up on. I had listened to like some hip hop and rap sort of things in the past because I've been interested in breakdancing and stuff like that when I was a little kid, but I had not really followed it recently apart from what we'd have at junior high parties. And so he introduced me to this fella who was a Christian gospel rap artist by the name of D-Boy Rodriguez, and album The Lyrical Strength of One Street Poet, and there was a song on there that was used as a sample, the traditional 60s song, I believe, Shout, you know you make me want to shout. And so that was really cool. Little did I know, at the time I had found out that D-Boy was kind of one of the first martyrs of Christian rap, and that he actually was killed on the streets. And I was even before I'd even gotten to know who he was really. In 1990, Petra also came out with their Beyond Belief album, and it was just incredible. It was the follow-up album to the one that I had gotten coming out of church camp, called All Fired Up, or On Fire rather. Beyond Belief was so awesome. I even got the choral youth collection of it, even though our church youth would have never done it. Al got interested in things. I think he took guitar for a while, and got interested in an artist I had never heard of called Phil Keaggy, and he had his album, and he played it a lot in our dorm room, and it was really good to study to and to chill out, called Find Me in These Fields. He even had little interludes that were just instrumental bits between there. Of course, I mentioned in the last video DC Talk New Thing, and that was still carried over. They still had that. There was an artist known as Michael W. Smith who had done a song that had skyrocketed him called Place in This World off of Go West Young Man about the same time. Amy Grant had her big crossover album success that was all controversial. The album was Heart in Motion, and I just remember there was a really rocking part to one of the songs on there called I Will Remember You, even though it was more of a ballad sort of thing. Now, here's a interesting segue, interlude, I guess, change up in things. A song I definitely remember from this time period was Here's a Quarter, Call Someone Who Cares by Travis Tritt. My grandpa, I called him Pop, they still lived in North Carolina where we had originally come from as a family, and when I visited him during the summers, I'd help him working on small engines and lawnmowers and things of that nature, and he just had one little old transistor radio that would play whatever country station was playing. I just remember that song played ad infinitum that summer, or a couple of summers when I was up there staying and doing, and so whenever I think of that song, has nothing to do with the song, but I always think of my grandpa. Of course, I told you about my first concert, going to see White Cross, the opening band for them, Fighter, had an album called The Waiting. I was still listening to it. Of course, in 91, Metallica, in the mainstream realm, dropped the Black album. The just wasn't really titled, it was just a black cover with the serpent and such. I had never heard of this band, but I learned of them through other Louisiana School folks jamming to it on when we were on the Gifty bus going to Walmart or something. It was called Two Princes by the Spin Doctors, and I just really enjoyed the sound. And then I mentioned in the previous video that there was something that happened in 91 that just like turned the music world upside down. Of course, a lot of folks reference this, but it was the coming out publicly in a big way on the pop charts of Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. And that just changed everything. I remember when I first came to the Louisiana School, kids were jamming to it. They were jamming to Pearl Jam 10, the album, because those both came out in the summer of 91. And just to show you how much of a kind of time gap there was with Christian music, Petra had released its next album following Beyond Belief called Unseen Power, and they were still doing the same hair metal sort of lyrical sort of stuff they had done in the past. Carman came out with another album there in 91 called Addicted to Jesus, and he did a lot of collaborations, one with Petra. He did another collaboration with the guys from DC Talk, and so it was a neat album. I enjoyed it a lot. But Carman was a perennial entertainer. And then I remember this album and another album I'm going to mention later, because, this album I first got into, really got into, Geoff More in the Distance. He had an album called A Friend Like You, and that came out in 92. And so I really started getting to listen to him. Little did I know I'd get to see him in concert a little bit later, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I also found this band that I was like, that's a cool name for a band that had a cool graphic on the cover. It was called Audio Adrenaline back in 92, back in the spring of 92. And some of the tracks were kind of cool pop, youth groupy sort of tunes, and then others sounded like kind of the first Beastie Boys, kind of that frat boy rock, thrash, rap sort of thing. But most people just kind of took it as a joke. Then I got an album that I near about wore out. It was kind of like a neo hippie sort of look that the band had aesthetically, but a group called Jacob's Trouble, and the album was Let the Truth Run Wild, and it was just really good acoustic sort of rock and regular rock. Then I got White Heart, Tales of Wonder. That was an album that Al and I both enjoyed and liked. We actually got to go see them at a concert at Louisiana College, and little did I know that that concert would have a lot of impact on me, as it would be one of the things that helped me to decide later that LC was where I wanted to go to college. I tried to mention in an earlier video that I eventually deleted and cut, but Bride came out with an album called Snakes in the Playground, and they were the closest thing rolling to Guns N' Roses back then as far as the voice of the lead singer, and that was in the summer of '92, right before I started to Louisiana School. There's a little known track or song called Chaperone by Lisa Beville, and you didn't have it happen much back then, but Toby McKeon of DC Talk, also nowadays known as just Toby Mac, actually did a little rap set of bars on that pop song. An album I saw the video for, and I loved the song in the video, and I got the album, and it ended up being one Al dug, and me, I was kind of like, I only liked this one song on it until much later, and I grew up and kind of liked it a lot more. Back in the summer of '92, it was an album by the 77s called, it was actually entitled Pray Naked, but only a few made it to market that way. They kind of made it like a subtle controversy about it, but they had a song called Nuts for You, and it was just good old blues rock. Eventually, I would just start buying some albums that looked interesting or thought I might like, and just trying some things out, because there just wasn't a lot of outlets to find out about stuff. So I got this album called The Lost Dogs and Scenic Routes. That was one of those rare diamonds that I found. And then, finally, some of the Christian music started catching up, and me and Al discovered this band about the same time. It was really cool, called The Prayer Chain, and they had released an EP in the summer of '92 called Whirlpool, and it was very cool, very grunge, alternative sound for that time, and it would end up being a good pillar of my early Christian music listening. Stephen Curtis Chapman, The Great Adventure. I got into that at church camp one summer. We went to the more local church camp. Well, not local to us, but it wasn't like Centrifuge, a nationwide sort of thing. It was Dry Creek camp, and Stephen Curtis Chapman, The Great Adventure. And then this album was one of the few albums that I had that I had to buy this album over about 3 or 4 different times, because it was one of my few Christian albums I considered my major outreach or evangelistic tool, I guess you might say. But it was a group called Tourniquet and an album called Pathological Ocular Dissonance. And it was basically like this heavy speed metal sort of thing, and it was still gritty enough that it was still kind of cool. It wasn't like it was just behind the times with what else was out there. Then when I went to Louisiana School, I got introduced to more of the coffee house and folk type of music, and one of the guys that regularly provided music for our coffee houses and events was a fellow by the name of John Voorhees, and he had an album called Picture Perfect Fool. I remember 2 tracks especially that would get performed quite often. One was The Big Men Came, and another was Cigarette Ash. Then right around my birthday in '92, Michael W. Smith came out with the Change Your World album, and it was quite something. My roommate Al, for my first year at Louisiana School, he bought this album, and I was kind of skeptical at first, but it became kind of the soundtrack of our first Christmas at the Louisiana School. Handel's Messiah, A Soulful Celebration. It was just incredible, I guess, arrangement of some classical music, but done in a soulful way, using urban, hip-hop, R&B, all kinds of different styles and textures and such, and it was very good. Speaking of Al, he and I both also got into the band known as the Newsboys. I had missed some of their earlier albums, but they had an album called Not Ashamed, and we actually ended up going out to Lindale, Texas for Dallas Holmes Ministry had a facility out there, and they did a festival called Jesus Go Fest, and I'll never forget it because we had I had these big baggy Levi's jeans, and we were out there dancing and jiving to the Newsboys, and it started raining like cats and dogs, and it was all muddy and nasty, and I think those jeans ended up being stained up permanently orange from the orange mud out there. Then in '92, DC Talk dropped Free at Last, and it wasn't going to be their biggest album yet, but it was incredible. Nobody had seen anything quite as huge as that up till that point, and that was in the fall of '92. And then in '93, an album came out, and I got to see them open up for Geoff More and the Distance, a group called Code of Ethics. They were kind of a Euro pop techno sort of group, and I just really dug like the lead singer Barry Blaze's hairstyle. I had curly wavy hair, but he had this straight hair, and it was just done in one of those kind of anyway, but you can kind of see it on the album cover. Then a Christian rap group called Disciples of Christ did an album called Pulling No Punches, and I actually bought the album specifically for one song that was a cover of a cover of a cover song that Petra had done covering an earlier band from like the 70s. It was a version of God Gave Rock and Roll to You, and they did a collaboration with Bride, and so it was like this metal rap rock sort of thing. In '93, I also got one of my first real sort of alternative albums, Poor Old Lou. They were from kind of the Pacific Northwest area, and they just had a very interesting, the name itself, Poor Old L-U, Lou. It's actually a quote from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, of all things. But they were a cool band, very interesting. Then Phil Keaggy in the spring of '93 dropped an awesome album called Crimson and Blue. And it was just kind of reminiscent of Beatles, Paul McCartney sort of stuff. But it was just really awesome. Al and I both really dug it. Carman then came out with The Absolute Best, which was a collection album, but he had put like I think 1 or 2 new songs on there. And then in the summer of '93, the Prayer Chain released their full-length album called Shawl, and totally flipped on their head what they had done in the first album. Here they had a real world beat alternative album, and you can tell from the cover it was very gritty, very earthy. Al picked up an album called The Throws and Fall on Your World, and I remember many a time he would set like an alarm clock to go off with that one. It was good album, good mellow sort of alternative. Kind of remind me a little of maybe a REM or something like that. And then, still being true to my rock and roll, hard rock, metal sort of roots, I got Guardian's album Miracle Mile in '93, and it was just good old roots rock, kind of reminiscent of Creedence in some ways. And then in '93, that summer and into the fall, I discovered this kind of surf punk sort of music, but it was melodic. They had a female lead singer, and the group was called Dakota Motor Company, the album Into the Sun, and the lead guitarist, who was actually more of a rhythm guitarist and also did some help with some accompanying vocals, was a guy by the name of Peter King. He actually went on later when I was in college, and he was one of the co-hosts of an MTV Beach reality competition show called Sandblast, if you remember that thing. But he was one of the hosts for that, bald-headed dude and such. In 93, Audio Adrenaline came out with a second album called Don't Censor Me. This one had the famous song Big House, and one I loved called We're a Band. Carman in 93 came out with another studio album called The Standard, and I remember me, my youth group, and I think Al joined us, and we went and saw Carman on that tour over in Shreveport. And so then last three to round it out. This song was kind of one of our unspoken senior class songs, Mary Jane's Last Dance by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers off his Greatest Hits album that came out in the fall of 93. It played a prominent role within the prom, even a little performance art there to go along with the song by our class pres and his girlfriend at the time. And then I think the last Petra album that I listened to came out about this time in 93, called Wake Up Call, and it was kind of a wake-up call to all the rock and metal sort of stuff, because it was kind of going away with all the alternative and everything else that was coming into its own. And then lastly, during our senior year, John Voorhees, who I mentioned before, came out with an album called Windows and Walls, and we got some of the first dibs to the pressings of it whenever he put it out. And so that one always holds a special place in my heart. Now, that was 50 in about 25 minutes, so I think I did a pretty good job. Hopefully I can edit this down some, but I won't make any promises. But it was just an explosion of music. But later, till next time, keep it PG.